Marty Coleman here with Hydra Sailing Solutions, and today is a very special day. We are starting our virtual coaching seminars, and today is going to be our first seminar, and we've picked starting as one of our topics. And really what we want to do over the long term is develop a toolbox of videos that talk about all aspects of racing, fleet racing, offshore racing, just really anything that really can help teams enjoy their passion of racing and get better. And we're going to bring in experts. We're going to use best techniques and tools and things like that to really try to help provide a foundation of best practices that can be implemented across any team and any type of boat. So let's go over here a little bit and take a look at kind of the big picture. So really what we're trying to do here with the seminars is just to build a library of best practices, and really just to try to give everybody a place to go where they can take a look and really help sharpen their sword and really try to improve what their teams are doing and how they're going about it. I want to use a lot of the industry experts, and today we have two very special ones we'll get to in a minute, and then help develop a playbook, a simple process of just being methodical. And after the seminar, I will send out to everybody a template for the starting stuff to have with them, and just to kind of refresh when they sit down with their teams before an event, to really kind of go over and make sure that they're thinking about and applying the right things to really help them get good starts consistently. And the goal is to do videos on a bi-monthly, every couple of weeks. We'll put up a new topic and try to get that out. So I hope everybody likes that. Please let me have feedback. This is really our first go, first technology solution that we're going to put out there to try. So we may have some bumps as we go, but please be patient, and please give me your feedback as we go through. So this seminar is specifically honed around starts, and not just how to pick a favorite end of the line. I really wanted to talk more about trying to have best practices of getting a consistent start. And the two folks that we have interviewed that you'll hear their comments is Ed Baird and Bill Hardesty. I think both of these individuals have very, very good techniques. They've been on a lot of different boats. They've been with a lot of different teams and have very good success. So what we're going to talk about today is really that kind of, we'll go through the fleet racing starts, kind of A to Z. We'll have some of the basics, but I really want to make sure everybody, thinks about, kind of the bigger picture, and, how to apply a process to their starts to really help improve and get better, consistently better starts. So that's really the goal for today. So when we think about that is, how important is the start? The start is a very important element of the race and the results. But the start really enables you to execute your plan, your strategic plan upwind. What do you want to do up the first beat? And the start will set the tone for, are you going to be able to execute what you're trying to do up that first beat? So very, very important. The more boats on the starting line, obviously the little bit tougher it is, the more important it is, and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about figuring out the best place to start and kind of go through that, but very important to go through methodically all the variables on the start and what that is, and we'll go through those. And then developing a routine, a flight plan. And I think this is what I think is really the most important to help with consistently getting a better start, is you got to have a methodical process that you can execute well at a higher percentage of time. And this what we'll call a flight plan that Jeff Ewenson uses was his verbiage I liked a lot. He called it a flight plan. I call it a routine, but the flight plan is kind of a good terminology. So thank you there, Jeff, for that nomenclature. So, and then after the flight plan, and then it's the matter of execution and that final approach. So we'll kind of break that down here a little bit and go through those as this slide progresses. Okay. big picture, right? Starting and going straight for a certain amount of time is really crucial, right? You want to have the ability to get off the starting line and either tack and go to the right side or be able to go straight and manage the left side, whether it's a puff or a shift or things like that. So being able to start going straight for a good amount of time so you don't have to duck a bunch of boats right off the starting line is really what you're trying to do. So just executing that acceleration, and having the ability where the boat to lure to view is not just squeezing you out and going slow. And then the consistencies, right? How do we improve consistencies? And one of the things that I've realized over the many years I've been sailing is that a lot of teams don't practice the starts enough. And I wouldn't say just the start process, but even the acceleration process, things like that. A lot of the races now have a practice day and they try to do some starts, and people just get out there and just try to get in line and do an execution. I think that's really not the best way. It's a good way to have that routine, but there are other starting routines, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but really need to have a methodical process of practicing the elements that are important to be able to execute consistently at a start. Consistent crew is always a key thing too, right? And just having the right team, and this is always a very difficult thing to do for really any team, is having a consistent crew. And I think if you really have a very good structured process that you can apply to a new crew member is something that will help also. And I think that's one thing that's very important is when a new crew comes in, is being able to articulate, hey, here is our flight plan, here's our process that we go through on the starting line. So each person has a designated role, whether it's call and time and things like that, and we'll work that a little bit. But having that articulated so that if a new person does come in, they can adapt to the team and understand quickly kind of what their routine is. And then obviously it's that teamwork. It's working together. It's executing the trimming and the heel of the boat and the weight management, and then having that communication consistent across the team. So that's really the big picture of the starting elements that we really want to kind of hone in here on a little bit. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so I'm going to start with Ed Baird. I got on the phone yesterday and did an interview with Ed about starting techniques, and as you can see, there's a picture here of Ed Baird's laser racing book. It says Ed Baird, Laser World Champion 1980, which I happen to have a copy of, a signed copy, which I do appreciate it. Thank you, Ed. It says number 41, all the best. So I don't know if that's your laser sail number was 41, but I appreciate your signature on this. But I wanted to go to somewhere in the book that Ed talks about starting here before we start his interview, and I think it's very, very interesting. And so here, I'm just going to read this real quick. Starting exactly at either end of the starting line is not advantageous, as the percentages will be against you for getting a good start. Go for a more consistent, clear air start near the favored end, but not immediately at the favored end. You'll have a better chance of getting a good start and be ahead in the long run. And I think that's really where we're going to get to here is how do you consistently get a good start. And if you win the pin and you fight for the pin every time, sometimes you'll win the pin and sometimes you'll lose, but you'll lose big. And I think that's what Ed talks about here, and we'll hear a little bit of that in his interview. So let's see if we can bring up his interview here and see what he has to say. See how we can get this to work here. All right. All right, I have on the line Ed Baird. Hello, Ed. How are you?
Hey, Marty. I'm good. How are you?
Great. Ed I've known Ed since I was a little kid sailing Opties, growing up in St. Pete. And Ed's was here sailing too, sailing lasers, and has done quite a nice job over the years, and a couple America's Cups, even helming for the Young America team back in 1999. But part of definitely a multitude of different America's Cups, lot of the TP52 teams now that he's been working with, a lot with quantum, helming, tactics, really been kind of tuned into that whole group, but also has done a lot of sailing, a lot of coaching, across the board. And, we're going to talk a little bit today just about some of the starting practices. I really want to try to help teams find ways just to get better. And I want to see if we can, what you do to, increase your odds of getting good starts. So when you hop on a boat for a first time, what do you think about and go through with a team to think about starts and working down that process?
Well, it's actually really interesting, Marty, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time during when everybody's sitting at home not able to sail right now and making this available to folks. But when I think of a new team that I sail with, or when I'm coaching a new group for the first time, and we start talking about starts, I'm always fascinated at how high people rank getting a good start in their overall process. What I see is that people think that the start is just everything, and they have to put all this pressure on themselves to get this amazing start, and if they don't, it just wrecks the whole race for them. And so one of the things that I generally try to work with people on is to understand that starting is just the beginning of a lot of things that happen in a race. And while there are races that are won by winning the start, most races are not. And I think that you got to kind of convince people that, the first 2 minutes of this hour and a half journey, or whatever the time is that their race is going to take, is not always as critical as they believe it is. And I think when you get people to relax a little bit about that, they start to make better decisions about how to start, so that it allows them to be in a place where they can have a consistently good first part of the race. And so that's really philosophically what I'm working with people on is to look, the start is a big deal. Yeah, for sure. It's a big part of the race, but it's not huge, and you shouldn't just try to win at all costs the start. What you're trying to do is get the least amount of points possible at the finish.
Yeah. Right. So, one of those things, if I hear you correctly, is you want to be able to start and go straight and have your options available, right? Getting flushed out, or being over the line, or, not making it in because you're barging, or, some of those things, right? Is trying to reduce those elements.
Let's talk about some of the things that happen. The biggest thing that happens when people go to a starting area is they say, all right, I can see that one side of the line is favored. Sometimes it's favored by a fair amount. And so you get an instant advantage if you start in that area and you start well.
Yeah.
But most of the people racing are not the people who are able to dominate a one-on-one battle, in a situation with another boat. The vast majority of people are more average than that. And so they need to play to their abilities and play to their strengths. And if you are not a amazing boat handling team, or you are not a fighter in tight circumstances, but you're fast and you have good boat handling, then that might mean a completely different approach to the start. You may avoid trying to start in the quote perfect area, and you might move away from there so that you can be more consistent in getting off the line cleanly, and then play the game from there. I mean, that's one part of it, but then there's another part that people don't think about as well, and that's that if you, for instance, you say you have a starting line that's favored on one end by 10 degrees, but the wind is shifting back and forth 20 degrees. And so sometimes that starting line is square, and sometimes it's 15 or 20 degrees favored to the better end. If you can start start, if you start in the 20-degree, bias, what you want to be able to do is stay on whatever the tack that's lifted is. You want to be able to stay on that tack as long as possible. And a lot of times what you find, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the story especially from younger sailors, that, I had this great start at the pin when it was really favored, but I just couldn't cross this one guy, and he didn't let me go, and we sailed for too long, and when we finally tacked, everybody on the right had gotten the next shift, and they were ahead of us.
Yeah.
And for me, that is less of a excuse for why you did poorly, and more of a reason why you shouldn't start at the perfectly favored end of the line.
Yeah.
I said, well, hang on. So if you started away from the pin when it was 20 degrees favored, and you knew the wind was going to shift back to the right at some point, wouldn't you want to be on the right as soon as you could after starting? So you get down near the pin somewhere, maybe 2/3 of the way down the line or somewhere like that, and you look for a place to tack as soon as you can, so you can sail on the lift. Yeah. And then when the shift goes back that 20 degrees to the right, you tack on it, and you're ahead of all those guys that started at the pin. So sometimes the geometry of the whole thing is people are thinking a little more like checkers, and they need to be thinking like chess.
Yeah. No, we see that a lot, actually. And I think if you plan on trying to be in that, I don't know what the right number is, depends on the fleet, but a lot of the times we say, guys, we don't want to win this, right, the first beat, but we want to be in that top 5, no matter what happens with the shifts up the beat, and we may not win the first beat, but as long as we're not in the back chunk and you're not able to kind of grind it out, where we're still in that top group where it's a little thinner, we still don't have to duck a lot of boats. That's a win in my mind, where you're not starting on the favorite ends, you're kind of off of those, and you can get through. But that's correct. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. No, I tell you, there's one particular young sailor who is similar age to one of my sons, and so I've watched a lot of his racing, and he is just a chronic pin-in starter. If there's ever any reason that you would be near the pin, he's the guy that's going to be there. And it's so funny to watch his history, because every once in a while he'll win the pin and when it's favored a little bit, and he'll cross the fleet and he'll win the race, and it'll all be awesome. But invariably, when we watch, you see him tangled up in this giant mess. He either gets a penalty, he's OCS, he gets stuck and hits the mark and has to do a circle, or at the very, at sort of average side of things, he has to bail out and tack and go behind a bunch of boats and hope that they don't tack on him. And it's just amazing that he won't adjust his strategy to just go up the line a little farther and race from a place that gets him a more consistent, start, and gets him into the first group on the first beat. If you can be in that, like you just said, if you can be among that top group halfway up the first beat, and you can do that over and over and over again, you're going to find that your results at the finish get better. Right. It's just your averages are going to work for you.
That's how you win world championships, right? The guys that win the world championships don't win the pin. You can rarely get away with that. The percentage of getting a good start, owning the pin is low. But starting up from the group and knowing that you're going to not necessarily win the first beat, but you're at least going to be still in the top, and then you fight for the rest as you go through the race.
I had a great, years ago, I coached a team that was trying to do an Olympic campaign, and we had a great episode where we're sailing in big fleets in Europe. There was a whole bunch of people that they didn't know, so they weren't sure who the good teams were and so forth, and we're sailing in venues that they weren't that confident about. So we had this one regatta where 3 times in a row they would start reasonably well, be amongst the top 4 or 5 boats leading to one side of the course, and look over to the other side, think that the guys on the other side were getting strong, so they would tack away from their group and chase the people that had gone the other way.
Yeah.
But the group didn't tack with them, meaning that the group felt that they were sailing the right way. They felt like they were on a lift. My guys tacked away, went all the way across the course, where the people on the other side, in fact, did cross them. But then when they came back, they realized that the people that they had left were crossing in front of them as well. So, they'd be way down the pack at the first mark. And I'm in a 60-boat fleet. I'm talking about being in the high 40s.
Yeah, you lose to both sides. Yeah,
and then they would pull themselves back and finish in 15th or 12th or something like that from the rest of the race. So after 3 races like this, I sat them down and said, guys, look, you are so fast and so capable of your boat handling. You're passing all these boats from when you're down in the pack. So why don't you forget about just chasing the guys on the first beat and just pick a side and win that side.
Win the group you're around.
Win the side. Yeah. If you win the side you're going to, you're going to be ahead of at least half of the fleet.
Yeah.
And then, which is better than how you've been doing so far.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get it completely wrong and you win your side, but it's the wrong side, you're still going to be in 25th or 30th place.
Yeah.
But if you get it right, you're going to be in the top 3. And, they were like, wow, yeah, that's interesting. And I said, look, you're so fast that you're going to gain later in the race anyway.
Yeah.
Why take this big risk on the first beat? So they changed their style a little bit, and all of a sudden the rest of their finishes in that event were all top 5s. Just because they relaxed about chasing every little, bad thing that they saw on the race course. I think it's a huge deal to understand what your team's capabilities are. Now, if your team is absolutely the best starting team on the water, then use that tool and go get the best start. But if you struggle with starts, think about where you need to be 3-4 minutes after the start and find a way to get there with some consistency so you're not taking these giant risks of getting off the line perfectly.
And then getting flushed and ducking a whole bunch of boats, and it's always hard if you get in that second row and you're ducking not just a little bit, you duck 1, 2, 3, right after 30 seconds after the start. It's really hard to fight
3
back.
And then the 4th one tacks on you,
yeah.
and you have to tack and go back and duck more guys again. So it's tough, and I think that's another thing that people tend to forget is that they only imagine what happens if it all works out. But you need to be in a place where if it doesn't work out, you can escape easily and get back into the race easily.
Yeah.
So you're not going behind the whole fleet trying to correct your mistake.
Right. And thinking about, obviously what side, if there's more pressure. I mean, we're always thinking about what side you think is going to be good, and you got to, whether the bias on the line is the same or different, you still got to get up that race course, with things that are going on, just, naturally.
Well, look, there's a lot more opportunities on the open race course than there are at the starting line. So, my approach, and especially my approach when I'm coaching teams that are newer or that are feeling like they are okay with ability, but they're not the strongest teams there.
Yeah.
My approach for that group has always been look for a place where you can do what you want to do for the first 3 or 4 minutes of the race. If you want to go to the right, start somewhere on the right-hand side of the line and find a way to tack and get there. If you want to go to the left, start a little farther down the line so that you can go straight. If one end is really favored and it's hard for you to get off that end, move away from that end a little bit, but remember which tack you want to be on after the start and work real hard to get there. And, it's been amazing trying to smooth that out for people to where they're not taking great big risks at the start, but they're getting in places where they can execute their strategy and there's so much race that happens after the start. If you can just be in that front group somewhere, it gives you the opportunity to play the game. But if you're behind all the time because you tried to get the perfect start and it didn't work, it's going to be a lot harder for you to have consistent results.
I did the Meldus 24 were, was it the Worlds? I think it was the Worlds down in Miami or in Ocean Reef, and there were 100 boats, and we all started on the same starting line, and I started in the middle, and I had horrible starts, just never, had to duck boats, and finally got going, and I think we would round in the top, 15 or 20, which was pretty good, but we got frustrated with getting bad starts, so we decided to start on an end, and won the start, blazing off the line, was able just to go, but we were so far in the end, we ended up rounding in like 50th, even though we had the best start possible. And it took us a while to figure out that because the line was so long, the starting line was so long, you didn't have the options of taking the headers as you were sailing back into the middle of the race course. And it was an interesting lesson to learn with 100 boats starting at the same time and how long the starting line was.
Yeah, and I tell you, Marty, that's one thing that I sit down with people all the time and say, all right, let's map out a couple of things that we need to understand about starting. One is how many boats are we talking about? Are we talking about 8 or 10 boats? Are we talking about 50? Are we talking about 100? Like you just said,
right.
Because the approach is very different for those 3 different scenarios. Are we talking about a mixed fleet where there's bigger and smaller boats, and your boat is the big one or your boat is the small one?
Yeah.
You might choose to start in a very different place depending on what you are. And then what kind of race are you doing? Is it a race where it takes you 10 minutes to get to the windward mark? If so, and it's not a perfectly square course, one of the ley lines is going to be only 4 minutes away.
Yeah.
So,
not a lot of time.
Be careful that you don't get trapped getting to that ley line too soon. And if it's not a square course, like if the race committee or the wind was shifted, the race committee maybe didn't catch up to what the wind was doing, you could have a 10-minute beat where 8 minutes is on one tack and 2 is on the other.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you better make sure you're in a place where you can sail the 8-minute part, right away and get on that long tack so that you're free to do what you want. So or is it a 2-hour windward leg, or is it a reaching start? All these things are important to think about. And I think one of the big things that teams tend to not do is that they don't sit in a room together and say, okay, let's agree on our strategy in this race, in this event that we're going into. How are we going to approach the start of the races that we do in this event, knowing that they are this long, that there's this many boats, that we are among this group in terms of quality of starts, and be honest and be realistic with yourself to put yourself and your team in a good place off the line.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and it's amazing how many different variables play into that, with the location and things like that. So there's a lot to think about, and that's hopefully with this when I get through the presentation, through the rest of this, we'll be able to identify the majority of those things to think about. The current, the sea state, the what was the forecast, the weather forecast trend for the day. All of those things go into your decision making process.
I love to talk about the things that you can control before you ever leave the dock. What kind of a day is it going to be? Is it a sea breeze day where it's nice and steady and the shifts are small, so it's going to be a boat speed race and you don't have to play the shifts that hard and you can find yourself farther out in the edges and that's okay? Or is it a day just after a cold front where the wind is changing 20 and 30 degrees with big puffs and big light spots? That totally changes how you approach positioning yourself on the starting line. And so those are things you can talk about before you ever leave the dock.
Like Key West, sailing in Key West, there was always, you were not the only fleet on the race course. And one of the things that you had to be very careful of was sailing up the middle of the race course with all the other boats that were on the race course, and deciding that we really got to be careful about going through the middle and finding the edges and staying away. Was turned out to be a pretty important part in Key West a lot of times.
Yeah, it's funny. We had that situation last year when we sailed the Maxi 72s. There were 4 or 5 boats at our events, but we were sailing at events that had other fleets. And at times, these other fleets would be sailing on courses that were inside ours because we were faster. So you'd go around the weather mark, and you had about a minute and a half maybe to decide if you wanted to jibe or not before you'd be locked out by the windward mark rounding of the Swan 50s, for instance, where there were 35 boats, and they all came around on starboard jibe, and if you came through there on port, you just had to jibe back to starboard and you'd get stuck. So you had to think about things like that, and there's an awful lot of different ways of racing sailboats, and we don't all just do windward thirds and around the buoys in perfect conditions. In a lot of club races, you're out there, just as you say, with a lot of other boats on the course, and you need to think about what they're going to do to your race.
Yeah, it's an important part. Well, it was really exciting with the IRC ORC Worlds coming up later in the summertime. That's going to be hopefully be a pretty big event, but there you got a lot of different fleets, a lot of different boats. It's really going to be interesting to see how that regatta pans out. Looking forward to a lot of boats. So hopefully that still happens, and we get some good sailing going on up in Newport this late summer. But good. Well, Ed, hey, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it, and I'm sure anybody want to reach out, I'll send them your way. But you can definitely, I'm sure you're always available for questions and comments. You've always been very good at helping me.
All of us love to talk about sailing, so especially when we're in the bar the late afternoons. Again, thank you from everybody for just putting stuff like this together and keeping people thinking about the sport while we're all quarantined and quiet in our homes. We do look forward to getting back out on the water, and thank you for keeping us inspired.
Great, Ed. Thank you. Okay.
All
right. So there was the interview from Ed Baird, and just very interesting on his approach and his take on things. Ed's done a lot of racing over the years, a lot of world championships, and done a lot of coaching. So you can see just really the methodicalness and kind of his approach to things. So. All right, well, let's go listen to Bill Hardesty. Bill Hardesty's conversation is a little bit more specific at kind of a starting routine. So we're going to work into that one a little bit here and see if I can bring that one up.
Okay.
All right, Marty Coleman here with Hydra, and I have Bill Hardesty on the line with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about starts and something that I think Bill has done so well over the years. I've sailed quite a bit against Bill, and Bill hops on a boat with a new team and really helps them consistently get better starts, and you can just see it in the results that the teams get that he joins. And there's something that Bill brings to a lot of different teams that really helps them more methodically improve their start. So, Bill, why don't you talk a little bit about why you think you do that and some of those things that you hone in on with these teams?
Yeah. Okay, Marty. Thank you. Thank you for the compliments. Let's just go through a couple of little things that I'm pretty adamant about, and it really comes down to being organized and communicating a plan. And so when I get with a new team or any team really, we have designated positions for different things. So we have one person doing the countdown, and that person, if it's a 3-person boat or a 4-person boat, may have another task as well. So this just like on the G70, we typically would have the forward hand doing doing the countdown time.
Yeah.
I'll be very specific in how I want the countdown time. So what we do is we do every 10 seconds down till 2 minutes, and then we'll do every 5 seconds from 2 minutes until 30 seconds, and then we'll do 30 seconds to count every second down.
Yeah.
And we do that very specifically because at 2 minutes, if I'm not heading back on my port tech approach, I need to start thinking about heading back on the port approach. So if I start hearing the cadence, every 5 seconds, I go, okay, trigger time. We need to be back on port tech looking for our spot for the final, back to starboard.
Yeah.
Then the 30-second marker for every second countdown is also important because we need to, at that point, make sure we have, the ability to accelerate before the guys around us. And ideally, we're still just a half a length back, accelerating 5 seconds before them, and at 30 seconds, really need to start checking in and saying, are we early, late, how are we doing against the guys next to us? And as soon as I hear 30, 29, 28, 27, okay, it's time to start going pretty much. Might hold for a hair longer, but not much longer. So those are triggers that I've built into sort of how I have that. And so just very specifically, if the guy starts counting every second at 45 seconds, that sort of throws it off a little bit. And so we go back and discuss it, and our practice starts. We say, okay, you're going to do it this way, and we're just going to see if it works better. We sometimes adjust. I've seen routines where the owner wants it, a little bit longer, a second or whatever. But we just sort of define those things down to the detail. There is a YouTube video that I did years ago for the Ethos in San Diego that discusses a lot of the timing of, just real basically, while we're on the phone, I can tell you it's, I put a lot of pressure on the helmsman, and in most of the teams, that's the owner of the boat, driving his own boat, and a lot of people sort of remote control these guys around. I try not to remote control, the owner driver. And so I put pressure on them to be free thinking and knowing to play and having a plan. And so we set up where we want to start by, we check the line. I prefer going head to wind in the middle of the line. That's kind of the quick, simple. I try to get on the line with, the velocitech or whatever, reading 0. We do head to wind, and that sort of, whichever way the bow's pointing, I can put my hands on the 2 winches or, in the cleats or the shrouds if I'm on a bow, and I can see which end of the line is favored.
Yeah.
The sort of like default start would be sort of hedging towards the favored end, but not necessarily winning the favored end. But, looking for low density, that's sort of the most important. Sometimes it's low density closer to the end, and sometimes it's not. It depends on what part of the regatta you're in. Early in the regatta, the low density is always at like the 25%. I mean, that was opposite of that. The high density is at the 25% areas. Everybody's still conservative. I've noticed that in the first couple of races of the regatta, you can start at the ends, and there's not very many people there. People consider that high risk, but it's more high risk for me to start in the crowd. So I'll move up one at the end of the other in early races. As the regatta progresses, you'll get, people get a little more excited and they really want to win a race at this regatta or whatever it is. They don't care about being conservative after a few bad races. They want to go and, try to get a good score. And they push the ends, and then you got all these yahoos at the ends pushing hard, and that's when you move to the quarters, the 25%, 75% down the line sort of areas.
So you mentioned
video,
you had mentioned earlier, real quick. Let me back up. You had mentioned earlier, which I think is kind of an interesting point, is you kind of let the helmsman do a little bit more of his game plan of trying to control the windward boat and where the bow on the wind is. I mean, I think that's one of the things that is difficult sometimes from a tactician articulating to a helmsman about, how to, maneuver and to stay close to the windward boat, but don't let the boat get too slow. I mean, there's a lot that happens. There's a lot that happens in there, and how do you manage that a little bit? I mean, it sounded like you kind of let them.
Well, let me go through what I first do with the owner is the helmsman. At 3 minutes, that we are going to be at the location that we want to start.
Yeah.
So if that's at the pin, we're going to be at the pin at 3 minutes on starboard tech. And that's the driver's responsibility. I'm looking around and I'm making plans, looking up the course for wind and shifts and clouds and whatever might be an indicator that I can use to make a better game plan. And the owner, the driver, whoever's in control of driving the boat has to be at the spot we want to start at 3 minutes. And if he's not at that spot, it really throws off the plan.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that they do.
That's your flight. That's what we call the flight plan, right? 3 minutes you want to be here, and at 2:30. I think most of the important time, usually for a start, is at that 2:30 window. If you're not in that right spot where you get onto port in the group you want with the boats around you, you're chasing yourself at that point. Yeah. All right. So
we're at our spot at 3 minutes. Down the line on starboard. We stand for like 30 seconds, and at 2:30, we're looking for the spot to jibe, and we're looking for low density spot to jibe. And so at 2:30, if we're going to be sailing into a crowd, we might jibe in front of the crowd. If we're at a crowd at 2:30, we might go a little farther and jibe after the crowd and jibe at 2:15. And that basically will set up the next part of the start, which is now we're following the train. Always do jibe. We do a counterclockwise rotation. So we jibe from starboard to port, and then we tack from port to starboard. And you basically will always pass the other boats on the right. And so I'm a big believer that everybody should probably do this process, and then it would be a lot easier. You wouldn't have people going bout
right.
Port starboard. Yeah, I try to get everyone to do the exact same thing, and then it just comes to execution.
Yeah.
So we're sailing on the line. We jibe. Ideally, I would jibe at 2:15, and I would sail on for 45 seconds, jibe at 2:15, and I'm reaching back. And when I'm reaching back on port, now we're really studying the distance from the line. So we have our velocitech, or we have the visual of how far off the line we are on boat lengths, and we have in J70, the trimmer is in charge of this. And the trimmer would at that point say, how far off the line do we want to be? And if the pin is favored, it takes a lot longer to get to the line because you're going more parallel to the line on starboard.
Starboard, correct.
So we shorten that distance up. So maybe it's 50 to 40 meters, something along those lines, depends on how much bias the pin is. If the committee boat's favored, it's easy to get to the line, you're going to get there quickly, we'll extend that list distance. And sort of the go-to default distance would be like 60 or 70 meters. It's like the default.
Yeah.
And if the boat's favored, we might open that to 80 meters. If something, maybe even 90 if it's windy and flat water and we feel like we're going to get to the line quick.
Which I think, right, in most fleets, though, I would say most of the other boats are probably less than that, right? Would you think that? Are you at 60? Yeah. The average person
would look closer.
Yeah.
But I also, if everybody sets up closer, I just hedge a little bit towards my default number.
Yeah.
I don't go all the way down there and end up, because there might be, something weird, current or something that, makes things different. You sort of have to have all that other homework done.
Sure.
And so again, the trimmer is calling it. The trimmer at that point would ask me typically. They'd say, "Hey Bill, how far off the line are we targeting?" And they would say, "We're currently 50 meters," and I would say, "Let's go to 65 meters." And then the helmsman's in charge of putting us at 65 meters. I don't want to have to tell them up, down, a little more down. Okay, that's good, and then watch the meters open up or whatever. They need to be able to do that on their own, and that's very important. That you can teach these guys and girls how to do that on their own.
Right, and that's on your port approach. That's when you're on your
That's the port approach.
Correct.
And so now we're looking to, at minute 15 or minute, usually the latest a minute. If it's a really big fleet, 100 boat world championship level thing, you got to do it all, 20 seconds earlier. So we might be at our spot even at 3:30, jibing at 2:45, coming back and doing our final tack at 1:30. Then we open the distance from the line a hair more. We just make some adjustments based on, those factors.
Yeah.
But always doing the same exact process. And if you do the same process again and again, people will start to realize that, this is what we're going to be doing, and there's no questioning. There's no, I call freestyling. Sometimes you're out of position, you got to freestyle it. So, it happens. But if we follow this process,
increases your odds. Yeah.
Increases the odds, right, like you said. So now the next thing that we work on would be that tack from port to starboard. So the final tack at 1 minute from port to starboard, we aim as if we're going behind the guy,
Yeah.
And then at the last second, we turn up and we tack under the guy. Yeah. And basically, that sets up that the boat that you're tacking under is never able to go and dip you and go behind you and take the leeward spot.
Right.
So you're aiming behind him, like a half a length behind him. And then okay, we're going to tack under this guy, and then we're going to 3, 2, 1, attack under. And the guy's, a little bit bow forward even. There's absolutely no way he can go away and accelerate and take your spot.
Because he can't bow down, right? Because he can't bow
Mhm.
down at you. Because you're holding him up, and then you're deciding when the trigger gets pulled. You're the one that pulls the bow down and accelerate before the windward boat can do that. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing about pointing behind him, he thinks you're going to go behind him, and you might or you might not. You can decide that. It's all in your cards. If you're pointing bow to bow and you tack, the guy's in a tough spot, so he's going to bow away, accelerate, get alert.
Yeah.
Now you're in a tough spot, so you got to just set yourself up. All you can do is control yourself, as I see it.
Yeah.
And if you control yourself better, the other guy can't do much more. And off you go.
Great.
So now the time is ticking. If you tack 70 meters at a minute, you're going to burn some distance towards the line in the tack. You got to end up about 60 and 60, maybe 55 and 55. So the minutes and the meters line up pretty good.
Yeah.
The meters on the velocitech. And you might have more meters. It's sometimes favorable to have more meters in seconds, like say 70 meters in 60 seconds.
Yeah. Depending on wind strength and sea state, all those things have a bit of a factor too. Yeah.
Sea state, and current, and wind speed, and the crowd even. How many boats are in your little group? They all sort of think. But we're monitoring this. So we get on the starboard with say a minute or minute 15 even. Sometimes give a little more time to make sure that you can adjust these things. And again, I'm now working with the helmsman on the final positionings of if there is somebody coming from behind, what we'll do is we'll crowd in on the guy to leeward of us.
Yeah.
And that'll prevent that guy that's coming in behind from taking that hole to leeward, and they'll pop to windward of you, and they sort of take that tough spot right up on your windward side.
Yeah.
But the worst thing you can do is have that guy take the leeward side of you, and then you're going up head to wind. You're totally done.
Yeah.
So I use a couple of key words. I'll say close the gap, and that'll mean the fairway towards the guy to leeward. So at this point, we've still got the guy counting down on the bow. He's doing every 5 seconds now, and he's communicating sharks coming from behind.
Because
that's not
timer.
an easy place to see. You're looking forward. And we got the trimmer is on the jib sheet, and he is telling us how many meters we have and how many seconds the ratio. And he'll say we're too fast or we're too slow. And he basically starts to adjust his opinion on the matter based off of how many meters we're burning off relative to how the time's going down. And so we've got those two guys are doing their projects. I'm working with the helmsman on positioning to not let anybody take our spot. And then we'll get to about 30 seconds, 25 seconds, and now it's kind of hard for anybody to take your spot at 25 seconds because
it's
full speed. It's
too late.
20 seconds. Somebody points at the leeward of you, you just trim in, and he's not going to do much.
You're not going to get through. Yeah.
Not going to get through. So he's got to be getting through by 40 seconds, the latest, maybe 35. But once you get to 30 seconds, now we're just working on do we accelerate earlier or later? And the guy that the trimmer actually. Austin, like Alabama stuff we see now in the J70, he basically will call that time to go, and he'll unfurl the jib, and then between the whole and make a final call on, okay, this is good angle, and then off we go.
Yeah.
And the goal is to be full speed, full trim, hiking at 0. Yeah. So it's not, let's get things set up at 0, it's already set up, and we are off and running at 0. And so a couple of drills that we do aside from setting up that process is we do a lot of we're sailing along and we'll say, okay, let's go head to wind, slow the boat down to whatever we think minimum speed is. It's like 2 knots in the J70. You can get pretty slow in the J70 if it's a TP52, something bigger. It might be 6 knots. The size of the keel is the biggest factor, really. Edgel, you can get even slower. So we'll get slow, and then I'll say, as soon as we start to get the minimum speed, I just turn rotate. That means to put the bow down. And we might not even go. We're just going to rotate and go slow. And then we will say, okay, we got 20 seconds. And I'll say, okay, count down 20 seconds. The bow guy will start counting 20 seconds. And we will trim the sails, get in position, and try to be full ready to go at 0. And so we'll do that. And so then we can say, okay, let's do one at 15 seconds and see how long it will take us to get, all the settings right and legs over the side in our positions. So we don't waste any time off the line. Everything's at the mark.
That's a really good drill, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't do is they go out when there's some practice starts that usually happen the day before, and they kind of jam in with everybody else, but they're not methodical about some of these other drills to help them with the communication and the execution of the acceleration, which is the key at the very last minute, is to be able to get up to speed and hold your position and go straight for a minute and a half.
Right, and the other thing that's really important is having good marks on the sheets, like the end hauler and the J70 is a critical setting.
Yeah.
So the mark on the deck and the mark on the sheet, they go to the exact spot every time. The other side goes to its spot. I have a mark on the main sheet. The traveler's preset, backstay's preset, and basically just pull the sails into the marks, get the legs over the side, and we should be 95% of the way there.
I think one of the things you taught me a while back was, we always have this tendency of, we practice right before the start with the wind conditions. So we get the backstay and the traveler and the vang, and we get all the stuff, and then we bear off, ease everything off, and then when we start, they're not right back where they should be. I think one of the things you were pretty adamant about is just, hey, once we got it set for that last little check-up wind, leave it as is. And then if the wind changes, you can adjust it, but it helps you hit that setting right at the start.
Right. It's a weird thing. Like, you get all the stuff without going to the doorway, but that's too tight. And the guy uses it. Well, what do you just use it for? Sometimes I've had that happen. It looks too tight. We just looked at it upwind, and it was perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So we get it set up, and then we
ease the jib out.
Ideally, pull to the marks.
Right. No, it's
Try
awesome.
to make it simple.
All right.
What else?
Well, I think that's really good. I think the I don't know what the right word is, but your flight plan or flight path, having that methodical, where the owner knows exactly what you're looking for with the meters off the line and where you should be, and I think that's a really good thing to implement and to try to replicate, so you can have better execution on the starts. I think it's those are things that you can look at. I take a lot of data from a lot of the boats, and I look at them virtually, and it's just amazing to see how many people don't have a natural routine where they're coming in or they're jibing at a minute and a half. If you're jibing below the boats, you're really going to have a hard time making it back. But no, this is good. Well, Bill, hey, thank you very much. I will add the link to the video you had put up before, and include that so people can hop out and take a look at that.
Great. Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Okay. Take care, Bill.
See you soon.
All right, so that was Bill's phone interview. Very good, very methodical. Like I said, I've just been impressed with. Bill's won, I don't know how many world championships, 9 or 10 or something like that, and on different boats and different platforms, and it's just a bit impressive to me sailing against him as much as I had over the last several years, just to see somebody come in and do such a great job. So always trying to learn. We're always learning, right? I'm always learning. This stuff is all really, really good stuff. All right, so let's go back now and talk a little bit more methodical. Find my slideshow. Where did it go? I closed. Oh, here we are. Okay. All right, so let's get in just to the basics. I'm going to touch base on these, not in full 100% micro detail, but most of us know how to check an end of a line. We go head to wind, get a feeling for which end is favored. Another way of doing it is going down the line, getting a compass heading, going head to wind, get a compass heading, and see if they're at 90 degrees. If it's the same, then the line is square. Obviously, if it's more to the right, you can tell. But most people know how to figure out which end from a line bias is square. So that's pretty easy. But now let's talk about other things that go into effect there that can change just by the line bias of what you need to be thinking about. Current. How much current is there? Is the current the same across the starting line? And is it, where's it coming from? Always checking. I always look at the leeward gate marks, or sometimes it's hard with a committee boat to see with the wind affecting the heel, but you can watch the bubbles that come off the back of the boat or off of the chain line or anchor line. You can see what's going on, but always try to get a sense, because that will have an effect at how you come into the starting line. So current being one of them. Another one is the wind forecast trends, right? So if the line is square and we know that the wind's going to go right all day long, you're going to favor a little more down towards the boat end of the line, just as a trend. And are you seeing that trend when you get out? When you leave the dock and you head out to the race course, start paying attention to all the puff patterns, the cloud patterns, the wind patterns when you first leave the dock, because that gives you that time frame to get a sense for what's going on from a wind perspective out on the race course. How are the puffs? Are the puffs righties? Because you'll need to use that a little bit later. If you see a puff coming down the right side of the race course and you know it's a righty, you want to move down towards the boat. So that's where, if you heard Bill earlier talk about during the last 2 minutes, he's looking upwind. He's looking to see if the wind or the puffs or things are changing exactly where he wants to start on the line. Does he need to move down a little bit one end or the other, based on what he has seen above the wind or above the start line? Another thing is where's the windward mark? A lot of the times the wind's not square to the mark. And we see this a lot, like if the pin end of the line is favored but the windward mark's farther right, it really reduces your time on starboard. You have to get on port quicker, because you're going to spend more time on port when the windward mark is to the right. So if the windward mark is to the right, starting farther down the line is going to be a little bit harder, because if you get locked out where you can't tack early on, you're going to run out of a lot of the starboard lay line is going to, I guess that'd be port line coming back, is going to come quicker. So think about where the windward mark is. A lot of the times you'll hear the guy on the radio ask, well, what's the course? What's the mark set to? Somebody will, they'll say, the course is 1.2 at 180 degrees. Well, at least then you know where it is, and you can compare that to where the wind's coming from. You do a head-to-wind shot, and if you're seeing, 160, you know that the mark is a little farther right of that, and it's going to be a little harder to get out of the left side of the starting line. The farther you're down the starting line, a little harder, the longer you have to go straight before you can clear out. So that may change your opinion a bit. But always something you need to be thinking about. That's the where to starts. All right, let's talk about the bias. Bill did a good job of mentioning about if the line is square and you're coming into the starting line, you have a distance and time element that you need to figure out. And always practice. We always try to get a practice start in before the first start of the first day, or of any day, just to get out there, have a little time left to try to do a time and distance. When the committee boat gets in, you can ping it, and then as soon as they get the leeward mark in, try to get there, ping it, and then just do a really quick 2-minute countdown and try to do your flight plan into the starting line to get time and distance. And what will happen here is if the wind goes to the right, and what will happen here is now on starboard, you're closer to the starting line from a distance perspective, and you're farther away on port. So that means your time and distance here, you're going to get there quicker if the boat end of the line is favored. And Bill had mentioned that in his. So you're adjusting to that. Is there a wind shift at the start? That does happen. Look at the flags, get a sense of how the flags are hanging on the committee boat. They're a very, very good indicator. Be very comfortable at looking at that all the time, because it can tell you right before the start if there's a shift. We saw a lot of this in Miami this summer, where it was very shifty, and trying to get the shift timed right at the start, was important. So as you can see, this distance shortens up. If you look here, you're sailing at this angle, and then when the wind shifts, now you're sailing higher, and it's a shorter distance coming in that start line, and longer distance when the wind shifts to the left, and really takes a lot longer to get there. So got to be able to make that adjustment as your final approach that you're coming in. You're making that decision. How far away are you? Okay, so let's talk about that flight plan a little bit more. Preset Traveler, Backstay Cunningham, Outhaul, and Jib Halyard. When you do your final setup, making sure your rig tension's right before the starting sequence, you're going to go upwind, check your jib leads, make sure you got your numbers that you're set for your sheets. You're going to have your backstay set. Leave it the same. Don't adjust it as you bear off and get ready for your start, because then it's not going to be right when you hit the starting line. Flight plan, where are you at 3 minutes, 2:30, 2 and 1:30? Developing a strategic plan. Bill mapped out a very nice way of doing it, and I think it's really good to try to implement and take away exactly that. Where do you be at 3 minutes? You want to be where you want to start, and then you're driving somewhere around 2.5 minutes, getting in line. You're looking for the density. Are you jibing onto port in density with good boats behind you? When in front of you, you don't want a really good team right behind you. So when you tack to starboard, they're under your bow. Try to be smart about that and not have one of those super top teams right under following you back on port tack. So as you're coming back on port tack, how do you adjust? Do you adjust for the shifts or puffs? Looking upwind, do you see more wind on the right? See more wind on the left? You can always tack a little bit earlier, or you can go a little bit later, pushing down the line. But once you've gotten in line, you're pretty locked in. You got a little bit you can adjust, and that's what you're looking for. And then that's when you go on your port final. We talked about that, and maybe 2:15, low density, and who's in front and back of you. Okay, tack early, tack with boats, or duck and tack later. Your kind of 3 approaches that you have there. All right. I've been running Hydra analytics for the last couple of years, and it's really interesting to sit back and look at over time kind of the different boats and who's getting consistently better finishes and how they're going about it here. And this is just a little snapshot of one of the IC-37 fleets this summer up in Newport. And you can see here, look at the flight path here. Somebody jibed around, boat number 7, and jibed around. And now they're coming in late to the starting line. So very, very interesting. Let's go. We might be able to take a look at this video if I can find this video. Here it is. So let's look at this. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is the kind of the result sets that I pulled together on the analytics. Down here is the current start time. You can see which says current time is at 11:39:50, and they start at 11:40. So this is 10 seconds away from the start here a little bit. But if we back up here a little bit, let's see if I can do this. And play this, let's see if we can kind of go forward here. But look, here we are, 38, so we're 2 minutes away. Boat 13 is above the starting line. Boat 2 is above the starting line. So this is 2 minutes. This is, close to getting in your final port approach for some, and then over here. So a lot of boats kind of just not having a good flight plan pattern here to really try to replicate good starts, okay? So what do we have here? This is about a minute away, 39, right about here. At a minute, boat 7 jibes. They're never going to make it to the starting line in time. Really going to struggle with that. And there's the gun right there. So you can see they missed it by quite a bit here. But that's the things you're looking for, right? Trying to have a consistent plan. Okay, let's go back. Time and distance. So now we have a plan we're executing So we've identified the line bias, right? So if the wind's gone right a little bit, we need to slow down our time and distance a little bit. And if the wind's gone left, we need to speed up our time distance. The sea state, how choppy is it? Is it lumpy? Is it Saturday or Sunday when all the motorboaters are out in Annapolis and it's a lot harder to get the boat going? Wind strength obviously has a key play in it, and and making sure that you're comfortable with the sea state, the wind strength, and being able to execute the time and distance and getting the boat up to speed. One of the things, at least for the J70s or furling boats, a lot of the Melgis boats also have this, is when do you pull the jib out? And it's something you got to get comfortable with, because when you're pulling it out, it's like a brake. You're pulling really hard. It pulls the bow down a little bit because you're unfurling it, and then you get it out. Then you can ease it and get going. So a lot of the time in the lighter air, we like to have the jib out earlier so we don't have that effect of pulling the bow down when the boat, when the jib unfurls. So kind of important to think about how the unfurling of the jib affects the boat and pulls the bow down and slows it down. And how long does that take before you can actually get the jib all the way out and then press on the jib, get it full, and get the boat going a little bit more to get back going again. Pull the trigger. How long does it take to get to full speed? And that's one of the drills Bill talked about, is just kind of going slow, finding your minimum speed, 2.5 knots. 3 in the J70 that tends to slide. A keel blade's not very big. We tend to slide sideways a little bit more, a little harder to get the boat, the flow across keel going. So we tend to try not to be under 3 knots in the J70. Melgis 24 would be a little bit slower. It's fine, but each boat's different. But you need to know what that minimum speed number is, so that when you pull the trigger, you don't slide sideways into the boat to leeward. All right, communication, bow person, and just being able to, making sure that everybody's in tune, the jib trim, the main trim, the tactician, and listening to the bow person on that. Let's see, start. Okay, controlling your positions. Bill talked about earlier too, that, earlier in the regatta, people act differently than later in the regatta. U flags and black flags can have a very big effect in making sure that you're trying to still get a good start, but be conservative, right? And that's not being on the ends, not being in the chunk, trying to find a little low density, being a little bit more conservative in regards to the U flag and the black flag. And then we talked about controlling the windward boat a little bit. How do you manage the boat to windward? You don't want to have a big gap between you and the windward boat, because that will allow the windward boat to be able to press and to accelerate when they want to. And if they get a little bit of a jump start on you, there's a very good chance that they're going to roll you. So you got to be close enough to the windward boat so that they can't put the bow down and go until you do. So trying to find that comfort zone, not too close where you can't turn your stern and you can't turn. There's got to be a little bit of room so you can turn the boat down, press on the jib, and accelerate before the windward boat. And that'll give you the ability, if they're holding the boat to windward of them slower and vice versa, that'll give you the ability to get out and possibly tack and cross. So trying to practice that and holding that high windward, thin lane, and controlling the boat to windward as best you can needs to be a practice element too. Hookers, right? The boats coming in from behind that are late, trying to find a hole, having the communication and making sure somebody's watching that, and that you don't let that boat get to leeward of you and take any amount of gap away from you is very important. Because if that boat comes in, they have speed, you're going slower, they're going faster, they get in there, there's no way you're ever going to get a good start to be able to hold a lane and go straight for a while. So very, very important to manage those hookers coming in, and don't give them the ability to go into leeward of you and fit between you and the leeward boat. You have to give up some space to do that, but at least the boat to leeward's not fast, where you have a chance to hold and hold your own from a speed execution perspective. Light touch on the tiller, right? I think Bill had mentioned in his comment was when the bow comes down, and then they accelerate. So trying to find where when you're like going, don't pull really hard on the tiller, which slows the boat down. You want to kind of squeeze down onto the jib at the right time and be able to accelerate. So practice needs to go into turning the boat, filling the sails, and accelerating. And weight movement, just with the boats, the dinghy boats, you got to be weight together, especially the 70s, 24s. Everybody's leaning in a little bit, just trying to work together so that the weight management helps a little bit. At least get off the line. So being together on that, very, very important. All right, so once the gun goes off, you're bow down, you're accelerating. Communication on the rail is very important to the helmsman, to the jib trimmer, main trimmers. If you're able to get the bow down and go fast and you have gaps below you, you want to get to your fast speed. The faster you go, the more lift you get. Most boats, you'll know what that, your boat scenario is. If you can get the bow down and go a little faster for that first 30 seconds, you're going to be punched out. You're going to be holding the lane really, really well. So having that communication over your shoulder, making sure the boat behind you to windward, if they got a little jump on you, how are you doing? And the rest, the helmsman's looking at the leeward boat, managing that element of it. And you got to be able to just quickly kind of change those modes. If you got the opportunity where you can put the bow down and go a little faster or not lose too much gap to leeward, get on it. Get it done quickly so that you can get there and hold that position. And another thing is what's good is the tactician can say, hey, if you got somebody on your bow, we need another 30 seconds here. We need to go just a couple boats are clearing out. We got one more boat to clear out. You've got to hold just a little bit. And just to paint a little bit of the picture really helps the helmsman and the trimmers kind of just make it through that hard time when you got somebody just under your bow. Go straight for enough time is not to have to, right? So that's really the goal, right? Is we got to just go, and if we do have a tough lane where we're not able to be at full speed, or a little bit thin and trying to hold a lane, and we're just waiting for some more boats to tack out that get flushed out so that when we tack and have to duck, it's only one boat or a little boat or maybe not even. And that's really the goal of, is to be able to not have to duck a bunch of boats. We talked a little bit about that earlier. All right, in summary, develop a consistent flight plan, right? And have a team flight plan. Whatever it is, work as a team together and be able to communicate that and everybody understands what their roles are, and then go out and just practice the execution of that. Each person has a specific job. Focus on how to get to the side of the course you want, right? And that's where Ed was really kind of talking about is, it's more important to be able to get to the side of the race course you want. And not always going to be right. Hey, we think the left side of this race course, top left, has been very favorable, and we just want to make sure we get there. Great. Start where you can go and get to that top left. If you know the wind's going right and you want to be able to do something different, then you got to be able to start down line and tack out and go to the right. So just making sure that you know and communicate to the team what your game plan is up the beat, and then try to start to be able to do it. Very, very important. Low density, right, is very favorable. That gives you the ability to have higher percentage starts to go straight and to be in that front group. And then practice acceleration on time and distance, not one time, but on time and distance. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you all for participating. I will send out a little summary sheet to everybody. I'll email that out to you guys. I'll send you the link for Bill's online video, and this video will be available for you guys to come back and to review and to listen to. Thank you very much. Please give feedback. This is our first one. We want to do a better job as we move forward, and really please give some positive, negative feedback. Whatever you guys want to see differently, better, please let me know. Thank you.